want to start by saying a special thank you to the supporter of Young America's Foundation's Free to Choose lecture series and everybody who's involved in tonight's organizing and programming. Your civilization is better than Hamas's, and it is better than those of the people who sympathize with Hamas, and you should not be shy about that. Your civilization is better in every conceivable way. It is better in terms of freedom. It is better in terms of decency, and it is better materially. Again, you should not be shy about this in any way. Hamas's morality is evil. In the view of Hamas, the ultimate goal is the full destruction of all non-believers. To that end,
very small point, and I don't know why it bugs me so much, but like, you're clearly a monolingual English speaker. Why not just say Hamas? Like why do that like little K sound before the H? Like, I don't really understand that.
Just so you can pause to think about the license it affords him to say whatever batshit crazy thing he's about to say, I guess.
Are willing to murder babies in their cribs and then to plant their own kids on top of rockets in order to maximize civilian casualties they can show off to the cameras. To that end, they celebrate raping women and murdering children, and they say it themselves. It is Hamas leader Mohammed Deif who explains, quote, "Today you Israelis are fighting divine soldiers who love death for Allah the way you love life and who compete among themselves for martyrdom like you flee from death." It is Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh who says, "We love death like our enemies love life." Hamas brags about its actions and its goals. And we in the West somehow still fall for it, and the question is why? Why are there so many people in the West eager to make excuses for today's Nazis, barbarians who carve live children out of their pregnant mothers? Why are so many in the West trembling to find evidence of Israeli errors in their prosecution of war against Hamas so as to set up some sort of retroactive moral equivalence between the Jews and their genocidal neighbors? The answer comes in two flavors: complicity and cowardice. First, the complicit. There are those in the West who are perfectly willing to side with Hamas, perfectly willing to parrot all of their evils, to repeat all of their propaganda, all of their lies, because they do agree with Hamas about one key notion: that the West is evil and exploitative. These Hamas fellow travelers are members of the so-called decolonization coalition. They believe that the West, because it has been uniquely powerful historically, is also uniquely bad and uniquely sinful, and thus it must be torn down. They endorse the language of radical terror supporter Frantz Fanon, who declaimed in the 1960s that colonially oppressed peoples should, quote, utilize red-hot cannonballs and bloody knives to destroy their colonizers. And they endorse the ideas of Jean-Paul Sartre, who argued, quote, killing a European is killing two birds with one stone, eliminating in one go oppressor and oppressed, leaving one man dead and the other man free. Those who are powerful are the colonizers. Those who are powerless are the colonized. Everyone powerful is an oppressor. Everyone powerless is oppressed. Thus, we see the bizarre spectacle of Queers for Palestine. People with LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign flags marching alongside those with Palestinian flags who would quickly murder them if they gained power over them. The fellow travelers fill the streets these days. There's a reason the Black Lives Matter movement, with all of its violence and its lies and its falsehoods, declared itself in solidarity with Hamas immediately after the atrocities of October 7th. The coalition is real, and it is, in fact, disgusting. And then there are the cowards. The cowards have spent generations apologizing for Western civilization. They've refused to acknowledge two obvious truths. First, that Western civilization has, of course, committed atrocities and evils in the past. And second, that nevertheless, Western civilization is, in fact, better than its competitors. All civilizations throughout time have attempted to engage in colonization and exploitation. Only one civilization has spent its own blood to free slaves throughout the world. All civilizations have engaged in ruthless suppression. Only one civilization has spread liberty. All civilizations have engaged in economic imperialism. Only one civilization has spread prosperity. Western civilization is great because it has provided unique good and continues to do so right now. But the cowards refuse to believe that. It seems arrogant. It seems ethnocentric. It seems so passé. It seems discriminatory. And so instead, they create a dream world in their own head in which everybody thinks exactly the same way. Thus, the sins of evil groups like Hamas, those are actually just some sort of rational result of oppression. Wouldn't you also throw a baby in an oven if you were locked in an open-air prison? Well, I mean, perhaps not. Perhaps you would never throw a baby in an oven because you know you don't think like Hamas. But put that aside. Wouldn't you? Maybe. It must be Israel's fault, because if it's not, then perhaps not all civilizations are created equal. Perhaps some civilizations are better than others. And that is not a thought that is allowed. This university, unfortunately, is a good example of this sort of thinking. Directly after the October 7th massacre, The university put out a vague statement saying, quote, to our students affected by recent acts of violence in Israel and the Palestinian territories, we are here to support you. You know, just recent acts of violence. No one could tell what those acts of violence were or who had perpetrated them or what was going on from that statement. Just random acts of violence. Some things, as a famous congresswoman might say, happened to some people. Nothing about Hamas, nothing about the massacre, just violence of some sort anywhere, like might happen on a weekend in Chicago. Eventually, the university put out a longer statement decrying Hamas's terrorism. The chancellor then attempted to beg off commenting entirely, stating, quote, I am skeptical that those in roles like mine should frequently comment on global or world events, which is super weird because this university has routinely commented on, for example, George Floyd or the unacceptability of racism against Black Americans, the Black Lives Matter movement. Murder of Jews, however, that's a different story. That's a little sensitive. And then a couple of weeks ago, protesters here gathered to shout a variety of garden variety Jew-hating slogans, ranging from glory to the martyrs presumably would be Hamas terrorists, to we will liberate the land by any means necessary, presumably including burning children in their cribs. This university then proceeded to say nothing. Presumably, the university would have had something to say had white supremacist protesters shouted about George Floyd. So why the double standard? Because to declare in favor of Western values over the values of the so-called oppressed would threaten the fundamental tenets of the left. And so Hamas fans must be given moral credibility. The university wouldn't want to come down too hard on the side of civilization. That might look discriminatory. Unfortunately, because of precisely this kind of cowardice, radical anti-Western ideals are now commonplace across this nation. The West has imported hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into our various countries who hate the West and see it as uniquely evil. You can hear many of them calling for the genocide of Jews in the Middle East. You can see their signs calling for the victory of terrorist groups ranging from Hamas to the Palestinian Authority to Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is the most dangerous phenomenon in the West, the alliance of the radical, their fellow travelers, and the cowards. But the West does not have to surrender, and it will not. I believe that the West will once again stand up for its own principles. The West's freedoms are good. They are morally good, and they must be protected. That means opposing moral relativism. Loving freedom does not mean that every single expression is equivalently valuable. Freedoms should not be trampled upon, and those who oppose freedoms should be opposed. Yes, of course, we have freedom of religion in this country, and that means that even radical Muslim citizens in this country have full rights. But that does not mean that our politicians and our administrators should cater to them. It is not, quote unquote, Islamophobia to point out that defending Hamas is repulsive, or that a peculiarly small number of Muslims seem to be dissociating from Hamas or calling for their surrender. That is the reality. Reality is not Islamophobic. It is just reality. Yes, we have freedom of speech in this country, and that means that the coalition of the pseudo-oppressed, very wealthy Westerners who can stand outside with their iPhones and jabber about the evils of Israel can scream and shout outside. More power to them. They should enjoy, it's a little cold outside. I hope they enjoy themselves. It also means the rest of us can recognize that support for terrorist organizations puts you well outside the so-called Overton window. Nobody has the moral obligation to hire a Hamas supporter. Now, if you're not a citizen, different story. Our civilization has no duty to welcome you in or support you if you support Hamas. You should be deported forthwith to a place more in line with the values you apparently treasure. The West has a long history of resilience. The West should not and will not go down without a fight, but that requires actual moral courage. That requires recognizing the greatness of the West and not being shy about proclaiming that greatness in the face of alternatives. It requires moral clarity. It requires the tough business of saying things that are true. If the West does say things that are true, the West will emerge successful and stronger than before. If the West does not, it will fall to the darkness. Thanks so much. Happy to take all your questions.
I see we've already cut to the first commercial break there. Shapiro's videos tend to have a lot of them. So yeah, this is that's his opening salvo before he starts arguing with the students. I definitely have some thoughts, but what do you, how about you?
I mean, well, first of all, definitely still I'm recovering from the goosebumps created by that shredding guitar intro.
I thought you were going to say that you're still in recovery mode from all the high-level important ideas that you just heard.
That guitar intro, like, I'm lucky I didn't pass out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No. I mean, look, I think that I think there's a lot you could say here, but one, and I want to get more into the details. I want to hear from you on some of that first. But I mean, like this sort of first thing that strikes me here is a little off-brand for Shapiro, but pretty revealing, is that very anti-free speech note at the end that he said, so he's talking about, he spends a lot of this talking about people who, support Hamas. And I'm pretty sure that when he says that, he doesn't actually mean support Hamas. He just means like criticize U.S. support for Israel, or, criticize, Israel killing tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. Like particularly one of the things, he said at one point that Black Lives Matter immediately declared its support for Hamas, and man, citation needed. I want to see where Black Lives Matter, assuming he's talking about the actual nonprofit with that name, right? Like, got plenty of criticism, don't get me wrong, but I want to see where they said we support Hamas. Like, show me that, right? Like, sure, I am 99% sure what he means is just criticized Israel. Said that the Palestinians' human rights are being egregiously violated. I'm pretty sure that's what he's calling supporting Hamas. So at the end, when he says no one has a moral obligation to hire a Hamas supporter, he's advocating blacklisting people based on criticism of Israel, and deport them too if they're not citizens, for sure. Yeah. But even American citizens, he wants to do McCarthyite blacklisting for criticizing Israel, which is like, okay, but like, I don't want you to ever pretend to be in favor of free speech again.
Yeah. It's like, obviously super vague what supporting Hamas means. People aren't going to like vote for Hamas.
Right.
Especially like they would have a right to do that if they wanted to. He also,
are you funneling money to Hamas? Are you, like, do you advocate like, that the place that you live, be run according to like Hamas's interpretation of Islamic law? Like that, this is all pretty good. Are you sending money to Hamas? Do you want the United States to send money to Hamas? Like it's all pretty fucking silly. But like the sort of grim thing at the end is, it's like, no, he's talking about deporting people and blacklisting them from jobs for expressing the kind of political views that he says are outside the Overton window. But like we also know, once we understand that, support Hamas is just Ben Shapiro speak for oppose the genocide that's going on right now in Gaza, that, like the stuff he says is outside the Overton window is in fact like wildly popular views, right? Like I don't, don't get me wrong. I don't think that like the majority of the American public is like where I am on this, right? I'm under no illusions about that, right? In terms of, in terms of sort of that kind of bigger picture kind of anti-Zionism, but I do think that like support for a permanent ceasefire, that's actually very popular. The belief that what's going on right now, rises to the level where you could use words like ethnic cleansing or genocide to describe it. That's very popular right now. There's like a poll that like where 50% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 say that, and another 30% say they're not sure. Right. So this is, and that's not 50% of all Americans. That's 50% of people who voted for Biden. But still, that's an awful lot of people who Ben Shapiro wants to just say no, their views shouldn't be tolerated. If they're not citizens, they should be deported. If they are, they should be blacklisted.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. You sound a little terroristy to me.
Yeah, fair enough.
That sounds pretty extreme. But also, yeah, just this idea that like if you are like a gay or trans person, you should, like, it follows that you should support a genocide in another country because the government there homophobic is like,
yeah, when you actually say it out loud in exactly the words that you just did, like, it sounds completely
Yeah.
ridiculous, right? Like,
right.
you know, it's like, oh well, you know, all right, they were homophobic, so fair enough, right? Like, they do what you want with them, you know, like, this is yeah. I
The
mean,
Republican Party wins here, like,
yeah, right.
be consistent about that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. If the most, you know, let's say the most extreme edge of the Republican Party like took political power in the United States, you know, the people who are like the most like dead-eyed, like moms for liberty psychos, you know, who you know, are you know, apoplectic, that they think that like children are being groomed by exposure to books that, you know, of the, you know, where there's like a gay character or something. Like, okay, you know, that's bad. I would still be opposed to displacing 85% of the American population from their homes and, you know, killing at least a couple percent of the population. That would still seem pretty bad to me.
Right. And you also have to recognize, if you believe like Hamas is that bad and has that much control, that like the citizens like can't do as much about it. But we're mostly killing them, you know. So
yeah, right. Like there's the same people who will make a big deal about the lack of democracy under Hamas in Gaza. Will then turn around and be like, oh, well, why are you against killing them? Right? Their government's homophobic. Like, this is just really wild stuff. And of course, it's also like, I remember Dave Smith, who we were watching a few weeks ago, had a good, you know, I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember, you know, interaction with him on Twitter where, you know, this was like the gist of it, right? That's like, look, whether you would want to live under Hamas is the most like sublimely irrelevant question here. It's like saying, you know, it's like saying that your view on the invasion of Iraq in 2003 should depend on whether you would want Saddam Hussein to be president of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, yeah. You know, it's just a non sequitur. That's not on the table, right? Like that's not a possible outcome of any of this stuff, right? The question is just, you know, are you going to, you know, question is, are these crimes going to continue against the civilian population of Gaza? And like, it's not like there's any outcome of this. Like, it's not like, you know, if you have, even if you don't think what I do, right, which is that the end game in Gaza is to, you know, make normal life so impossible that, you know, you can convince people to accept, you know, voluntary transfer to other places, right? You know, even if you pretend that Israeli actions right now are consistent with the goal of Palestinian life continuing as normal when it's all over in Gaza, it's not like the Israelis are gonna like spread like secularism and gay rights to Gaza, or have ever pretended that that's part of their goal, right? Like these subjects just have nothing to do with each other.
Totally. Yeah, which is I think pretty obvious in this case, because Ben Shapiro is extremely concerned about like cancel culture and everything, unless it involves like, you know, genociding a population because their government is homophobic. All of a sudden now he's so woke about LGBTQ issues.
Yeah. And all in favor of canceling Americans who have the wrong opinions. Yeah. No, absolutely. So another thing I wanted to so there are two other things I wanted to say. So there's the less important one that I caught in that opening statement, is when he was begging on the university administration at Wisconsin for making a statement that vaguely alluded to recent acts of violence without saying which one. And he thinks that's horrible moral cowardice if you're talking about 695 Israeli civilians being killed on October 7th. But obvious follow-up question, would he want the University of Wisconsin administration to go into great detail about the tens of thousands of Palestinians who've been killed by Israel since then, or the millions that have been displaced from their homes, the hundreds of thousands that are starving, right? Like, does he want them to like specifically call out that stuff, or would that be yet more evidence of left-wing bias if they did so?
Yeah, I think he would probably consider it anti-Semitic, you know?
Yeah, no, I think he almost certainly would say that. And yeah, and then like the last thing I had, and like this is actually, you know, the most important, is that he said that, oh, people in the West are desperate to hype up what he called the errors committed by Israel in Gaza in order to, so that was the word choice, errors, in order, and I wrote this down, to establish a retroactive moral equivalence between Israel and its genocidal neighbors. So, two points on that, right? One is that the neighbors thing is actually really seriously crazy, like referring to Gaza as like Israel's neighbor, as if this had been like an independent state, you know, before October 7th, right? Like, that's like, no, this is territory that was, in that Smith formulation, right? The prison yard was abandoned to the prison gang, but like but certainly air, land, and sea borders, what food was allowed to get in, what, like, et cetera, how close people were even allowed to get to the fence. The perimeter of the whole thing was all lethally controlled by Israel the entire time, from the so-called disengagement in 2006 up till October 7th. There was never a time when any of that wasn't true. So, I mean, just like neighbor, it's like, come on, you don't think, even Ben Shapiro doesn't actually think that Gaza was an independent country, right? Like at any point in this time. So, I mean, that's really worth pointing out. And yes, also just the idea that 695 civilians can, being killed can make Hamas genocidal, whereas the IDF killing well north of 30,000, possibly dramatically north of that. I mean, if you go with Ralph Nader's point about the, like the argument he made about how the numbers are being lowballed, but, certainly I think everybody acknowledges, right? Well north of 30,000 people. It's like, 695 is genocidal, 30,000 is an error, right? Or like, hundreds of thousands of people starving, right? Like going like days where, they get maybe, one meal a day, maybe not, often none days in a row, where children are dying of starvation while aid isn't being allowed in, so that you get these like total absurdities, like the US like airdropping token amounts of aid as if into enemy territory, and talking about spending 60 days building this pier to let it in there because Netanyahu won't just let it in the trucks. That's an error. They 1.9 million people being displaced from their homes is an error. I mean, that's just like an accident. The IDF tripped and accidentally kicked 1.9 million people out of their homes. I think it's, I mean, short of something with nuclear weapons, I think it'd be really, really
failure.
What's that?
Intelligence failure.
Intelligence failure. Yeah. Yeah, short of a nuclear mishap, I don't think there's any way to kick 1.9 million people out of their homes by accident.
Yeah.
And like, of course, there's like 12 pages of the South African file into the ICJ that's just like assemblage of, quotes from high-ranking Israelis expressing genocidal intent. It's not even just inferring intent from actions, although I think that's the most important thing. It's the, it's also inferring intent from words, right? So it's like, this really just feels like an article of religious faith to me, that like in the Ben Shapiro worldview, like bad, scary Muslims do crimes. The worst thing that it's possible to imagine the United States or Israel doing is an error.
Yeah, definitely. I was also curious about what you think of him invoking Jean-Paul Sartre and I guess Foucault and Fanon. Yeah.
Oh, I actually missed the Foucault part. What did he say about
Well,
Foucault?
he refers to moral relativism.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the Sartre thing, I mean, we could start with that. What's your take on that?
What my take on that? I don't trust Shapiro, so I'm not saying that Sartre couldn't have like said something bad about this, but I'm just going to suspend judgment on that one until somebody can give me the full quote in the original context, because Shapiro just doesn't have a lot of credibility for me as a source there. But Fanon, I actually do think, we actually talked about this when I was in This is Revolution earlier this week. I actually do think that there are some pretty big differences between Fanon's worldview and the kind of, Marxist analysis and the kind of, moral universalism that I'd certainly subscribe to. But the part of all that that's most interesting to me is actually the part you just reminded me of, the moral relativism, because I think that people like Shapiro use that term in like exactly the opposite sense of what it actually means. Like a moral relativist is somebody who refuses to apply the same standards to different, countries, different societies, different situations, right? It says, oh, well, that would be wrong over here, but it's not wrong over here, right? That's moral relativism, where you say like, the same way we're all relativists about politeness, that we say, oh, well, that's not a rude gesture in that culture, right? This is that like, but it is in this culture, right? So it's rude to do that here, but it's not rude to do that there. The moral relativist would say, well, that's wrong for us, it's not wrong for them. And they'd sort of deny that there's like some kind of overall sense of right or wrong we could appeal to. But whenever the Ben Shapiros of the world accuse people of moral relativism, what they actually mean is the opposite of relativism. What they actually mean is what they're referring to as moral relativism is equating bad things done by other people, by, the bad people, by the enemies, with bad things that are done by, the United States or Israel. So I think what they really mean by relativism is precisely applying the same standards across the board, right? I mean, that's what they're actually getting at when they throw around the relativism accusation. It's like, oh, how dare you equate what we do with what the bad people do? It's like, well, equating what we do with what the bad people do isn't relativism. It's universalism. It's saying, here are my standards, and I'm just going to apply them consistently everywhere. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.